Morning. Today is Wednesday, Chof Beis Elul Tavshin Ayin Daled. We are in Teres Menachem Sefer Mamar Tavshin Yud Aleph Tavshin Yud Beis. In the Mamar of Yud Gimel Tamas Tavshin Yud Beis Nosato Lireiecho. We are on page Shin Lametes. We're up to chapter 6, the last chapter, Ois Vov. The Rebbe explained that miracles and mitzvah have a very innate connection one to another insofar as they are both the idea of bringing in something which is inherently transcendent to the world, into the framework of Seder Shtalshalos and into the world. And that is that within the framework of the world there's something which is called Teva, nature, which doesn't openly reveal godliness, on the contrary. And a miracle, and similarly a mitzvah, the effect of a mitzvah is to introduce something which is beyond nature, meaning to say, it introduces the perspective that Hashem is the power behind everything, and that is, it's in a revealed manner. When you have a miracle, it basically defies nature. Similarly, a mitzvah introduces Ein Sof, which is beyond Seder Shtalshalos, Inter Shtalshalos, and therefore it lifts Teva and Seder Shtalshalos to the point that that Teva itself recognizes and realizes that its true existence is really and truly what? Hashem Himself. The Emes Havaya La'elam. It draws down the truth of Yudke Vovke of Hashem La'elam into the world. Now, the Rebbe began this Mamar on the Pasuk Nosato Lireiecho Nes Lehis Noises, which is a verse in Tehillim that Hashem gives a nes to those who fear Him, Lehis Noises, in order to lift them. Until here, the Rebbe explained the idea of nes, the word nes, in the sense of miracle. But nes, the Rebbe also mentioned from the commentators that nes also means tests. What is the connection between miracles and tests in this idea of revealing something which is transcendent into our frame of reality? That's what the Rebbe addresses in chapter 6. With this we will understand also the connection and the association of miracles to the idea of tests. So first the Rebbe defines what tests are. The general idea of tests is it's in a manner that in truth there is no substance to it. And the whole point of the test is that the person who's serving Hashem should not be moved by this test. Meaning to say, what does it mean a test has no substance to it? Unfortunately, we know that some of the tests we face indeed do have substance. We're not only talking about spiritual tests where we are tested in our behavior, our morals, our morality, our ethics are tested. We're talking about challenges that people face in life, whether it's in health matters or parnasa matters and sustenance or other tests, which are indeed very substantial. But the point that the Rebbe is making here, which is something which is discussed in a number of places in Chassidus, I think the interpretation is this. Chassidus explains that there are two ways of serving Hashem. Two types of serving Hashem. We learned about this also, I think, in last year's Yud Beis Tammuz Mamar. In other words, Tavshin Yud Aleph. One way is Avodas HaBerurim, serving Hashem by refinement, meaning to say, interacting, engaging with material matters, physical matters, for the purpose of lifting them to Kedusha. For example, the very basic example, when a person eats L'Shem Shamayim, when a person eats with the intent of serving Hashem, he lifts the holy spark, as it were, the divine energy that is in the food into holiness, because he utilizes it, he consumes it for the intent of serving Hashem, and he utilizes it for the purpose of serving Hashem. So there is something that exists, the person interacts with it, and lifts it to Kedusha. A nisayon, a test, is designed only for the person to discover very deeply rooted soul powers within him, in order to have the correct perspective so far as the test is concerned. In other words, the test itself, there's nothing to work with. You can't refine it. You have to basically stand up against it in a very forceful essentially strong manner to say, despite the fact that I'm facing these tests, I'm carrying on and serving Hashem and believing in Hashem and so on and so forth. And that, as it were, takes away the test. So in other words, the whole, if you will, substance of the test is there's no point to it other than, in other words, you're not interacting with the test, you're interacting with yourself. So in other words, the substance of the test, the challenge that you're facing, has no meaning or substance to it insofar as lifting it into anywhere. Are you following what I'm saying? Right? So that's the way it seems to be explained in Chassidus when we say that...
The test doesn't get elevated or challenged.
Correct. It's the person that gets elevated. Whereas when we deal with Avedus Aberurim, for example, that which you are interacting with gets lifted as well. In Chassidus it says it's similar, not exactly, but similar to a mitzvah's leisesa, to a negative, a prohibition, or a commandment of things that we're not allowed to do. So how do you deal with them? By not doing, right? So in other words, how do you engage with that phenomena? There's no engagement, there's disengagement, there's pushing away, there's breaking, right? Okay, so this is the idea of, it's that Nisyan is really and truly ein be mamish, there is no substance to it. The whole point is for the person not to be moved by the test from his determination and his commitment to Hashem. Particularly the idea of tests insofar as the righteous tzaddikim are concerned, Rosh and Yisrael, the heads and the leaders of the Yidden, of the Jewish people, who on their own have completed all their matters, they have worked through everything. In other words, their avodah is complete, their service of Hashem is complete, and they have no association to tests which come as a result of concealment. Right? What's the idea of a test? The idea of a test is that it conceals. It's there to challenge. The person has a challenge suddenly. He believes in Hashem. He's serving Hashem. Suddenly something comes in and challenges his whole framework. Right? And the idea is that notwithstanding that challenge, he stands up to it. So in other words, the whole idea of a test is to conceal godliness. A tzaddik, the leader of the Jewish people, does not have this. It has no association to concealment. Why? Because his whole frame of reference, his whole frame of reality is godliness. So why do tzaddikim have tests? Don't forget that this is a Yud Beis Tammuz Maimer, the day the previous Rebbe was released from Soviet prison. So, as it were, there was a challenge and a test that the previous Rebbe faced insofar that he was in prison for spreading Yiddishkeit. So here he is serving Hashem and spreading Yiddishkeit, and suddenly he's in prison for that. That's a challenge, that's a test. So why did he have that test if a tzaddik on his own has already worked everything through and on his own really does not have any association to tests? But rather, the tzaddik and the leader faces the test because of the generation. The generation is unworthy. So therefore, the tzaddik faces the test. So therefore, so that when in the ascent of the tzaddik, when the tzaddik goes from one level to a higher level, in order for the tzaddikim to be able to lift, to take along also the people of their generation who do have an association to tests because they're on a lower level. That's why the tzaddik also has this idea of tests in order to take along this generation with him. And the whole intent and purpose of these tests is in order to nullify them. What happens when you push away and you nullify a test? You draw down the transcendent light, which is inherently beyond nature. You draw it down, in nature itself. In such a manner, in such a manner that everybody sees the miracle, to the extent that even the nations of the world see the miracle. This is what happened by the previous Rebbe. He faced the challenge. He was imprisoned. He was sentenced to death. Then it was commuted, and then once to 10 years hard labor, then to 3 years in exile, and ultimately he was freed. So this was the idea of him having this test, and then, as it were, standing up to the test and breaking the challenge to the extent that things turned around. That's the idea of drawing down that which is transcendent into nature. This was the idea of the service of Hashem, of the Rebbes, of the leaders of of the leaders, they drew down this idea of miracles in nature itself, in the physicality and in the materialism of this physical world. How did they draw it down? How was it revealed in such a manner? That also those that oppose, who were the ones that concealed and covered up, they were the ones who were responsible for this. And also those who were, as the Navi in Yeshaya says, your destroyers and those who lay you to waste will come out from you, meaning to say that those that were responsible for the previous Rebbe's imprisonment were Jews. So even they too should admit, should have to admit that the truth of Havaya of Hashem is in the world and forever. This is the meaning of the second part of the verse on which this Maimon is based. Hashem gives miracles and tests to those that fear Him in order to lift them. Why? For the purpose of the truth forever. What does that mean? To draw down the truth that Hashem is the one that is responsible for all of existence, and to draw that down into the world and forever. And it was in such a manner that the Bala Simcha, the one that we're celebrating, his release from prison on Yud Gimel Tammuz, the time when this Maimed was said, he served Hashem in this manner, without paying any attention, without looking at the tremendous concealment and cover up and covering that these tests brought about. It explained there's a difference between serving Hashem through refinement and serving Hashem through tests. When one faces a test, the concealment, both of them are concealment. But when we face in the service of Hashem through tests, the concealment is much deeper, much greater than serving Hashem through interacting with physicality and refining it. Because tests actually touch the actual life of the person, just as it was by the previous Rebbe, that his life was in physical danger. And also these tests also actually affect the godly soul, not only the physical life of the person, but also his godly soul. That a person is sometimes in a challenged situation where his spiritual state is challenged. And nevertheless, the previous Rebbe, served Hashem with self-sacrifice. This is how, because of the other definition in this second verse upon which our Maimon is based. Where did he get the strength from it? From the eternal truth. The Koishet, as we said earlier, Koishet, the truth, Koy al Avram, this is a reference to Avraham Avinu, the first of our fathers, who opened up the channel of the Mesiras Nefesh for self-sacrifice. And not only did he open up the channel, but he bestowed it as an inheritance to all of the Jewish people, and particularly to the heads of the multitude of Israel, the leaders of the generation. And in more particular, to the leaders of the Jewish people in the generation of the heel of Mashiach, meaning to say, in the later generations, in our generation. The Ma'ilasa what is the special quality, unique quality of the heel of the foot? Who should nikir by Yisri in them Mesiras Nefesh? In the heel of the foot is more obvious the idea of self-sacrifice, because it challenges us. We learned about this also previously, that the heel is something that because it has the mind that has intellect is a challenge to self-sacrifice, where the heel has Kabbalah soil, has the acceptance of the yoke, and it does what it has to do. When you want to put your foot and check if it's a hot tub, as it were, you dip your heel, you dip your foot into it, right? So Avraham Avinu is the one that bestowed this idea of Mesiras Nefesh, the power for self-sacrifice, to all the Jewish people, especially to the leaders of the Jewish people, and especially the leaders of the Jewish people in the last generations. And since the serving of Hashem of the entire generation is dependent on the head and on the brain of the generation, on the mind of the generation, who's that? The Rebbe of the generation. And as we know, the Rebbe is Rosh Tevis, is an acrostic for Rosh Bnei Yisrael, the head of the Jewish people, right? So, and we know that the Gufa, Basaresha Ozil, the body, follows the head, and in the reference he refers to the Gemara in Eruvin. The Gemara in Eruvin over there says that there were two Tanoim, two sages of the Mishnah, known as Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Gamliel was the head of the yeshiva or the Av Bezdin. He was the recognized leader. Rabbi Yeshua was a tremendous scholar also, and they were always sparring with one another. There's a number of stories in the Mishnah, at the end of Rosh Hashanah, other places, where Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua just didn't get on in terms of halach, in terms of learning, and there were tremendous challenges between them. Gemara and Brachas about Tfilas Aravis, if it's Rishus or Chayva, you can look it up. The bottom line is that there was always this challenge. Rabbi Gamliel was the recognized head. Then when Rabbi Gamliel passed away, Rabbi Yeshua decided that he's going to nullify all of the rulings of Rabbi Gamliel. So one of the other Talmudic sages of the Mishnah came in and said, Rabbi Gamliel, you think you're going to be able to accomplish this? We know, my proposition is that the body follows the head. There's also another Gemara concerning Egla Arufa. If you find a deceased person, a beheaded person, outside of the city, you don't know which city he came from, so you have to measure, right? If you find the deceased person, then you measure the closest city, and there's a whole story, a whole procedure. You have to bring a calf, and you have to slaughter it, and you have to say that this elders say they're not responsible for it. What happens if the head is severed, and the head is closer to one city, and the body is closer to another city? So the Gemara says the body follows the head. So you measure, you go according to the city that's closer to the head. But that's another Gemara. Here, for some reason, they're mentioning the reference in the Gemara in Eruvin, which talks about this idea where this Tana said to Rabbi Gamliel, to Rabbi Yeshua, the body follows the head, meaning to say the generation has to follow the head of the generation. If in his lifetime we followed him, you can't come along. We're not going to allow you to go and nullify his rulings. The bottom line is, though, that the head of the generation is responsible, and it's in the head of the generation that the whole generation is dependent upon. So the whole Aveda, the whole service of the previous Rebbe, throughout his lifetime, even when he was very young, which is the preparation time and the precursor to the time when he was going to be leader, and even more so, certainly when he was actual leader, everything he did was was done through a state of self-sacrifice. There's many stories. The previous Rebbe, when he was a child, he was in prison a number of times because of his commitment to the Jewish people, because of his commitment to Torah. The Rabbi Akiva and his self-sacrifice, the previous Rebbe's, wasn't like the self-sacrifice of Rabbi Akiva. Omar, who said, Rabbi Akiva, his whole life, was aspiring to give himself away to Hashem in self-sacrifice. So he says the previous Rebbe's self-sacrifice was not like Rabbi Akiva's. Rabbi Akiva, the Kiva Shechib is Mesiras Nefesh. Rabbi Akiva, since he was looking for this idea of self-sacrifice, it's not pure self-sacrifice. Why? Because he wants to. True self-sacrifice, total self-sacrifice, means that you also give away your godly soul. But what happened by Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva had a desire to serve Hashem with Mesiras Nefesh, which means to say his godly soul wanted self-sacrifice. So it's not. He hasn't given away his godly soul. But rather the way the previous Rebbe served Hashem, he had a mission, previous Rebbe, and he was prepared to fulfill his mission under all circumstances, up until self-sacrifice, including self-sacrifice, which means that he wasn't looking for self-sacrifice. His objective was to fulfill his mission. But which means that if he would, in order to fulfill his mission, he would have to give away his life. Then he had that too. He had the self-sacrifice too. What happened as a result of the previous Rebbe's self-sacrifice? And through the self-sacrifice of the previous Rebbe, they saw in actuality, he affected the lifting of the spirit of entire Jewish people who lived in the most terrible times at the time in Soviet communist Russia, right? And as a result of the previous Rebbe leaving afterwards communist Russia, as a result of his self-sacrifice, the Hasidim carried on with tremendous self-sacrifice. In actual self-sacrifices, many, it's known that the previous Rebbe, when he started his mission in Soviet Russia, he called in, I think, 9 or 10 of his Hasidim, I think together with him they were 10, and he said a Krisus Bris Dam, a blood covenant with them, that they're going for this all the way until sacrifice. Many of them perished. And besides those 10, many others perished. The teachers, the Shochtim, those that were responsible for sustaining Yiddishkeit in that generation. And this also caused a tremendous lifting of the spirit all over the world. When the previous Rebbe came after he was released from prison, he was a hero. He was a Jewish hero. He affected to lift this generation. He drew down this level of I am the first, I am the last, Hashem says, and without me there is no God. He drew this down in all of the Jewish people and in the entire and in the world. This is the meaning of the verse. You have given those that fear you a nace with which to be lifted because of the truth forever. Which means that the revelation which is beyond nature, the level of the truth of Hashem forever, right? Which is the second part of this pasuk. Is drawn down in a revealed way to eyes of flesh. Shekulam, that all of them, not only the believers, and legam kol Yisrael, but all Jews. V'gam elu, not only the non-believers, but v'gam elu shamarsayich machirvayich mechitzeu, even those that challenge and are active against Yiddishkeit, the destroyers and those that lay to waste Yiddishkeit, who stem from the Jewish people. V'gam u'Yisraelim, and also the nations of the world. Ro is hagilu, they saw the revelation of the Ma'alam HaTeva from beyond nature, B'Hateva Gufa, in nature itself. That's what happened in this whole episode, this whole saga of the previous Rebbe. This is a preparation and a preface Limois HaMashiach, to the days of when Mashiach will come. What's going to be when Mashiach comes? Nature itself will be in a different type of conduct. Nature itself will behave differently. Right? Since every revelation depends on some preparation, on some initiative from below, so every revelation from above necessitates some initiative from below. So therefore, the self-sacrifice of the previous Rebbe, was the initiative from below, for the revelation of Mashiach. For through his self-sacrifice, the self-sacrifice of the previous Rebbe, he drew down to all those that are connected to him, their children and their children's children. He drew down to them this level of the truth of Hashem in the world forever, meaning to say he drew down this transcendent level of godliness into their state of consciousness, which is the preparation for the coming of Mashiach. And through this we will merit speedily legula shleima, to the complete redemption, in which time it will be the glory of Hashem will be revealed speedily in our days al yidei Mashiach tzidkenu, through our righteous Mashiach. This concludes this fascinating Maimer, and please God, the Mitzvah tomorrow we will start the Maimer of Shabbos Pashas Masei, Mevachim HaChedesh of Tovshin Yud Beis.